quickly share my screen. Check. Are you able to see my screen? And I hope I'm loud and clear.
Yes.
Great. So team, welcome to the India Smart Protein Innovation Challenge. Myself, Mohammed bin Zacharia, I am an LCA consultant. Today, I will be walking you through the environmental assessments, particularly focusing on the life cycle assessments and carbon footprints or carbon equivalents, product carbon footprints. Quickly taking through, quickly giving a background of about myself. So I'm an environmental engineering postgraduate from NIT Warangal. I have been working in the sustainability life cycle assessment ESG domain for a couple of years, has done projects across the globe and has benchmarked the activities with presentations and Scopus Index publications. Some of the particular skills which I am focused or like I am expertise is in the life cycle assessment, which I will be explaining, like I will be giving a knowledge sharing about the same in this session. Apart from life cycle assessment, I also expertise in the environmental social governance, GHG, IMDS, agile model, etc. In terms of the associations, I'm an ACLCA accredited professional along with mentally advisory community, part of mentally advisory community for the past 4 years. So that's like a background about myself. Coming to the organization which I belong, the organization name is Windhives Sustainability Solution. We are a group of like around 10 to 15 members with 2 PhD holders who are acting as the SMRs. For the technical side, we do have 7 LC and GHG experts and also multiple analysts. Same as well, the group or the Windhives team has done projects across the globe and has expertise in the sustainability domain. In terms of the journey of Windhives, like it has been started by IIT and NIT alumni in 2019, has been expanding rigorously during the pandemic as well. We have expanded our footprints across the Middle East, Europe, Canada, as well as US. From 2021, we have a strong partnership from Middle East. And in the last year, we have been working in the East Asia market, focusing on the Malaysia, Vietnam, Singapore regions. These are some of our prestigious clients. So I will not be going further in terms of the introduction part. So particularly today, I will be focusing on knowledge sharing towards the life cycle assessment or environmental impact assessment, which can be utilized to understand like how bad is a product or how bad is a project or how good is something else compared to another one. So I will be walking you through what is LCA and how we can conduct LCAs. We'll be taking you through a sample case study of how we can do an LCA in a real life example. And further, these informations or these knowledge you need to utilize in the innovation challenge to assess the alternative protein products and compare it with the conventional product and further communicate for better strategic development and also policy enhancements for the betterment of the alternative proteins in the society. So that is the key aim of the knowledge sharing, and further you need to utilize this knowledge in terms of enhancing the alternative protein industry. Going through the overview, so we all know that like we have been facing different issues. Like every day we are hearing issues of like climate change. Like I'm facing like basically I'm from Kerala, and currently Kochi or Kerala is facing the monsoon, and we are having floods in some of the region. I'm sure like we all, like all of the participants might have faced some of the climate change related issues, might be the water pollution, might be the air pollution, might be the water scarcity, the prolonged summer, alternative climate effects. So all these showcase like there is climate change and everyone are sure about it. And it's already a hot time for all of us to pick up the bags and work for it. And it's like it's already the national as well as global problem where everyone are focused. So what we can do in terms of mitigating the climate change. So for mitigating the climate change, each of us has a role to play. And the topic which I will be covering is particularly the life cycle assessment or the environmental assessment, focuses on assessing a particular product or process which we are utilizing or which we are consuming in our day-to-day life, how bad it is for the environment and how we can make it better. So maybe this assessment will not mitigate the problem of climate change, but will show us where the problem lies or which items we need to replace from our life, maybe from our culture or from our day-to-day being, so that like the impacts can be reduced throughout the product or throughout the organization which we serve. In a nutshell, life cycle assessment is a scientific methodology to assess, as I mentioned, the environmental performance of a product or a process. And the life cycle assessment is guidelined by particularly two ISO standards, which is ISO 14040 and ISO 1404. These standards provide the guidelines or the framework on how to conduct or how to assess a particular product. So maybe like everyone are communicating, okay, this is a green product. I am utilizing some green product, or like this one is much better than another product. Everyone are marketing in that terms, but ISO provides guidelines on how to assess it and how we can properly compare between two items. When coming to the phases of LCA, we do have particularly 4 phases. One starting from the goal and scope definition, which mentions the study to be performed consistently, and then coming to the data collection or the inventory stage, further the impact assessment or the modeling part, and the interpretation, which will be the reporting part. So it has a lot of science behind each of these stages, and there are principles of chemical engineering and environmental engineering to do the assessment. So maybe we'll not be touching or deep diving into the topic, but we will be going on the surface of the topic, and we will see like how we can do a small assessment in a real quick manner. So to conduct any assessment or to conduct any environmental impact assessment to understand the performance, we do need some kind of information, particularly the material used within the system, the energy consumed, the waste, any emissions to the surrounding. So for example, we take a quick example of rice flour. So rice flour or wheat flour. So wheat flour may be like within a small flour mill. It is produced by maybe grinding the wheat grains. So the raw material for the grinding machine within the wheat flour mill is the wheat grains or rice grains, and the process involved is the grinding. So for the process involved, there might be or there will be some energy consumed. The output will be the wheat flour as well, and there might be scraps or some wastages in terms of while grinding, and there will be emissions. So this is an example of a really small process. Whenever it comes to a big development or like a complete product, there will be multiple similar processes. There will be grinding process, there might be washing process, there might be cleaning processes. So all these processes within any production flow accumulates or sums up to form the impact or the total impact of a product or a project which we are maybe a product which we are consuming or a project which we are utilizing in terms of infrastructure or educational purpose, etc. In terms of the time taken for an LCA, it can vary. It can vary from a couple of days to a couple of months. And to define the boundary, there are something called LCA boundaries. So in terms of the boundary, then there can be cradle to gate boundary, which is like from the raw material extraction, maybe till a material manufacturing or a end of product. So when we tell about the example of the wheat flour is a final product. So raw material extraction will be the cultivation of the wheat grains, And then there will be some processing, like there will be some processing to take it from the farm and bring it to the wheat flour mill, and there will be processings within the manufacturing facility. So that kind of boundary is called cradle to gate boundary. There can be boundaries like gate to gate, which where we address or where we assess within that particular factory alone. And there can be boundaries, or like we are doing the assessments out in a specific cases or use cases. So for example, we want to compare how diesel is better than gasoline or any other fuel, natural gas. So that's like how in a use phase each product performs. So that's called use stage assessment, and it can be a gate to grave assessment. So there are multiple LCA boundaries. So depending on the boundary which we set, we can do the assessment. In most of the cases, it is the cradle to gate boundary which is conducted to do the assessments for the product footprints. So basically, cradle to gate boundary supports it as in easy comparison between products as well. So this is like snips of the LCA models. This is a small model of a single process and having a single product. Whereas this is a detailed process flow diagram showcasing multiple processes involved and a big product development. Just wanted to show the complexity in terms of the modeling. In terms of maybe to summarize these points, as I mentioned, LCA is just to analyze the environmental impacts of a product or a process. The advantage of LCA is we can understand like where or which areas within our system is contributing high, and which are the maybe the materials or the energy or the resource consumption which needs to be reduced or changed. So there might be a process which is heavily energy consuming. So we might need to change that process so that the energy can be reduced and overall our environmental impact can be reduced. So that is the advantage of having an LCA. Obviously, in LCA, there are multiple limitations. One of the key limitation is the data sets, the limitation in identifying the proper databases and ensuring that complete value chain is captured. So such kind of limitations are there. And while communicating, maybe like I have kept a particular boundary for the assessment, and another consultant has kept another boundary, and so that we cannot compare those two elements equally. So the boundaries are important, the functional use cases are important, and that comes as a limitation of LCA. Now, maybe we can quickly see one of the LCA which we have done in the past, and which can be utilized as a case study or like an example of to further enhance or utilize for the assessment of the alternative protein products. So here I will be showcasing a case study of a coffee powder, how we have done the assessment, what are the criteria which we have considered while doing the assessment. So we wanted to assess the environmental impact from cradle to gate of a coffee manufacturing or a coffee powder manufacturing, and we delivered the impacts for the coffee powder session. So in terms of the boundaries, we had considered the cultivation, we had considered the processing and delivery, we had considered the manufacturing, we had also considered storage and logistics, but we have not considered the usage and end of life in these states. So basically, because it was the requirement, and we limited it ourselves in terms of till the storage and logistics. So there can be different boundaries. There can be boundaries from cultivation till manufacturing. So for example, like in a particular activity, we want to assess only till the production. We don't want to see like how the performance is between the while there is a storage or where there is logistics, because like we don't know the there might be chance like we might be not knowing how the actual condition is there in the storage or in the actual logistics for the business case. So hence, like depending on our requirement, we can set the boundary, and the flexibility is given as per the standard. So in this, we have considered the cultivation, we had considered the processing, we have considered the manufacturing and storage and logistics, and we had taken inputs from all the stages, like what are the different raw materials going for cultivation, what is the energy utilized, what is happening within the processing and delivery, what is happening within the manufacturing and as well as storage. So this is the same, this is the boundary. And in terms of the inputs which I mentioned, so this is some kind of a detailed flow chart to showcase like how uh, the processes are captured. So in the cultivation phase, there is a plantation. There are some raw materials going to the plantation that can be something like manure, that can be fertilizers. That there is watering happening. There is a picking operation which is manually done and automatically. So this kind of detailed flow diagrams we need to draw for any of the assessment. And sometimes there can be chance like we have data of the coffee bean processing alone, and what we don't know what happens in the agri farms. So in that case, we will need to take or we will need to depend on secondary sources or secondary emission factors to understand like what is the impacts at these stages. And in this part or the particular area where we want to or where we have access to the data, we will be drawing the flow charts for that area, and the remaining part will be kept for the secondary data sources or databases. So this is like a detailed model of the same process flow within the software. So LCA softwares are utilized to build the model for to do the complete modeling and to do the complete assessment. And after LCAs, we do get multiple environmental impacts. One of the environmental impacts, which you all might be like familiar or like at least might have heard, is the carbon impacts or carbon emissions, which is basically measured in terms of kg CO2 equivalent. Kg CO2 equivalent of the global warming potential is a common environmental impact which we get from the assessment. Along with global warming potential, we also do have multiple other environmental impacts such as eutrophication potential, acidification potential, which basically communicates different environmental impacts, maybe like water pollution, the air pollution, the wastewater impacts on the river, etc. So these are the SNPs. So this is the global warming potential or the carbon footprint. This is the acidification potential representing the air pollution or ozone depletion potential, similar like how impact the product is having on the ozone layer. Eutrophication potential, which is communicating the impact of wastewater. So these kind of results can only be derived by modeling within the detailed softwares. So maybe like to quickly do the assessment and to simplify our process, we do have developed some quick methods where we can do the complete assessment, but we don't want to do the modeling within a software. So that's called quick LCA or quick LCA tools. There are multiple quick LCA or carbon impact tools within the market. Uh, we have like basically Windhives has also developed a small tool to assess impacts or the carbon footprints till the cradle to gate phase, which is like raw material and production phase. There will not be impact assessments happening for use phase and end of life with the Q tools. So in the Q tool, we will be utilizing the secondary data sources or secondary informations and further developing or further utilizing the emission factors for the calculation of the environmental impacts. So after after this session, you will be given access to a small set of data sources which is needed for the challenge or which is needed for the assignment as part of the activity uh, 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 in terms of the emission factor and data sources for the assessment. In terms of the data sources, in terms of the assessments, when we are doing a quick assessment, the assessment is done in a simple method like the carbon footprint of a product will be equal to the activity data or like whatever business information which we are having into its emission factor. So for example, we are going to assess the environmental footprint of a pen. So in that case, like I will need to know like what are the raw materials used. Like so, I will need to know okay, there is a plastic used, and I will need to know its quantity. Second thing is like what is the ink used and its quantity, and what are the energy utilized or the processing energy utilized for production of this particular pen. So if we have these quick, a few quick informations, I will be able to have a small product assessment. And when I'm having information of like from which location to location it is supplied, or like what is the supplier and from where it is purchased. So even if I'm having the location information of the suppliers, I can do a further assessment in terms of transportation analysis as well to showcase, okay, for producing this pen in terms of production, I am having this much environmental impact. To bring the raw materials to the factory, I'm having a particular impact, and that can be calculated with the distance and with the quantity which is being transported. So that's like a quick method of the assessment or a quick carbon impact assessment with emission factor and activity data or the business data, rather than going to the complete modeling. But still, we will need to draw, or we'll need to understand like how the materials are flowing, what are the processes involved within the material, and what are the wastages happening. So a small brief of that information will be needed to even do the carbon footprint assessment. Okay. So now coming to the last stage, or the action items which we are focusing, or where we need to utilize the short info which I provided, is the assessment. So basically, we will be providing some business information in terms of alternative protein product, basically the liquid egg alternative, the mix, the production mix of it, as well as the energy consumed and the wastage information for producing alternative egg. And you will need to utilize the LCA knowledge or the LCA principles to calculate its environmental impacts. And further, we need to compare it with how it performs with the conventional egg. So that like if we want to communicate like whether it performs better than the conventional proteins, or the chicken or the poultry based proteins, or whether it is not that beneficial compared to the conventional protein industry. So the comparison will enhance in communicating, okay, like if it is better, okay, we can communicate, okay, alternative protein industry is much better in mitigating, has a role to play in mitigating the climate change. So particularly coming to the task will be to assess the carbon impact of production of a liquid egg alternative and compare it with chicken egg or the conventional product. So basically, to have a standardization, we have kept it to be with a chicken egg. To do this assessment, what you will be getting is one is particularly the material ingredients heat of the liquid egg. So we will be providing the information of like how the liquid egg or the alternative egg is produced, what are its ingredients, what is the energy utilized, from which location it is purchased. So that kind of illustrative details will be given to you. Second thing is the emission factors for all these products will be provided, so that can be utilized for the assessment. As I mentioned in the previous stage, you can utilize the material information along with the emission factors to do the assessment for the alternative protein. And what we need particularly from you for the in terms of the assessment is, one is the inflow outflow sheet. So which is like we need to showcase like what are the different materials which is used. So you can utilize the same document which we provide as or the material ingredient sheet to develop this, and the sample of the same will also be shared with you. So here we need to communicate. Maybe I will show in a while like how the material sheet will look like. Here we will need to communicate what is the system what is the inflows to the system, and what is the outflows to the system. Give me a minute. I will quickly share the screen and show the sheet as well. I'm sharing my screen once again. Hope it is visible. Can you please confirm?
Yes, I can see it.
Great. So this is the life cycle inventory sheet which we need the team to fill in as part of the assessment. So we will have what is the process involved in the system. What are the different types of flows? Whether do you have any material inflow or energy inflow? So that type of flow should be mentioned here. What is the item which is being flowed to the system? So that's why it's like this unit process name is a technical term, and we need to ensure like what is the material or the energy inflow which is going to the system. So here, like for example, system 1, there is some inflow, and the inflow is something like egg flavoring agent, and the flow type is material, and its quantity is something like this, and this is its unit, and you can see the emission factors as well. So the emission factors are also provided in the adjacent sheet. So based on the item which you are modeling or you are having in your boundary, you will be having emission factors here. Or if you are missing out with any of the emission factors, that you can also reach out to us to get the emission factor if you are not able to get it within the publicly available domains. So there is some materials inflowing, then there is some product which is getting as a processed output from the system, and there is some wastages as well. And then further, like maybe this product is utilized in another system, another processing, and along with the first output, there are other materials as well. So depends on like how complex our product is, or like how our system is, we will need to have it detailed out. So this is a quick or a summary example which I thought like will show you, and which will be helpful for you in drawing or in developing the product lifecycle inventory sheet. Along with this lifecycle inventory sheet, we also need to ensure like the materials flow diagram is also done. So this needs to be gone hand in hand, so that like if you are good with the lifecycle inventory process flow diagram, then you will also be good to understand, like you will be able to easily fill out the lifecycle inventory sheet as well, and further do the calculation. So here, like basically, like if we draw the process flow diagram in a proper way, then we will be able to easily fill out this sheet. And the process flow diagram also will be same, showcasing basically a factory line or a production flow line, depending or from the information which you get from this material ingredient sheet. Okay. So that is the two outcomes which we need, and this will be one of your intermediate output which is required. And the final output which is required will be the CO2 assessment report. So once this is approved, like once we have verified this are good to go, you can have the assessment report based on your insights with after conducting the assessment, and also how you compare it with the conventional chicken egg as well, and also what are the measures or like what points you want to communicate in terms of enhancing the alternative protein industry by your assessment. So that is the idea of having this assessment. So that's all from my side in terms of giving an overview on the life cycle assessment, as well as in terms of the assessment which is expected from your side. So I will keep some time for the questions. I know like we do have time constraints, and like this topic is like really big. We might not be able to close out the life cycle assessment in a short 30 minutes or 35 minutes or 40 minutes session, but still I'm happy to have your questions as far as possible. Like we can have the discussion, and once you are having your hands on the actual activity, you might have additional questions which you can post to the isp@gfi.org, so that like we will be coming back with the answers for that.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. I'm sure everyone has deeply kind of understood the topic, as well as have a bunch of questions. We've had some of them come into the Q&A box, so I can just read them out for you, and maybe we can go down the list one by one. Does that work?
Yeah.
We have a question from Rashi. It's, what are the challenges that one can face if they are doing research for this particular problem statement?
So particularly like in terms of the, maybe I will comment in terms of the life cycle assessment part of the activity. So whenever you're doing the research, you might be facing difficulties in understanding like what is the actual process involved for the production, or you might face challenge in terms of getting a proper data sources in terms of emission factors. So such kind of challenge can be there while you are doing research on a life cycle assessment part.
Got it. Thanks, Mohammed. There's another question that's come into the chat, which was, does the LCA analysis also assess the overall carbon dioxide as well as GHG emissions?
Yeah, so the LCA analysis accounts for the basically like first to clarify, like both the GHG, carbon, everything are like synonymously used. So both are same. Either we tell GHG or carbon emission, so both are same. Just it will be measured in terms of kg CO2 equivalent, either in GHG or carbon footprint impacts. It will be measured in kg CO2 equivalent. And whenever we are doing an LCA assessment, yes, we try to accommodate all the impacts, or depending on the boundary which we set. So as I mentioned initially, we can set different boundaries. So in a cradle to gate boundary, if it is a cradle to gate boundary, so all the impacts from the raw material excavation or raw material mining till the production of a final product will be accounted by conducting a life cycle assessment.
Got it. Thank you. There's another question. In LCA, do we go about the entire supply chain of the product in general, or just study the stages which are required for our analysis?
So like depends on till where we can have the access. So in the example of the coffee, we had access till the cultivation part, or the client had access till the cultivation part. So we had gone till the cultivation and we had accumulated data from the raw material extraction phase onwards till the production phase. There can be chances like we are not having access till the cultivation, or we don't know the supply chain. So in that case, we will be depending on the secondary sources, and we will be modeling for the particular area which we do have the access. So it will be the factory. It might be the factory where we are producing, or the product is getting produced. So that information will be accurately modeled. The remaining part will be taken from the emission factor databases.
Thanks, Mohammed. I think there's one question on the example that you had shared about the coffee. Why was the mushroom powder mix used in the coffee? I think it's more of a qualitative question.
Yeah, so basically like this coffee manufacturer had different type of coffee mixes, and mushroom was one of their ingredients. So like in terms of like the food side, I'm not the right person to answer. Like, and I don't know why they have used it, but that was their particular business ingredient, or like IP, I will call out. So it was their ingredient.
Thanks so much. Do we have any other questions? I don't see any in the Q&A box or the chat, but we can maybe wait another few minutes to see if there's any other questions. If you have questions that come up as you go through the problem statement more deeply, or once you've done a bit of reading, you can always reach out to us at ispic@gfi.org, like Mohammed mentioned, and we can direct the questions to Mohammed as well, and he can get back to you. But if you have any questions right now, this is your opportunity to ask it live. Post this Q&A session, we'll also have our second speaker, a policy specialist from GFI India, Radhika Ramesh, who will be briefing you on the final policy brief that you're required to submit as part of this policy problem statement. So please do hang back after the Q&A session. All right.
Okay.
I don't see any other questions, so I guess we can wrap up. Mohammed, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks everyone for the participation, and hope you have some additional info, like maybe you are getting some insights on a new domain, and we'll be happy to help. Please reach out if you are having any questions while you're on the ground to do the assessment.
Awesome. Thank you, Mohammed. All right. With that, I will pass it on to Radhika. Radhika is our policy specialist, and she will be briefing you on the work that we do out of GFI India on the policy side of things, and how you can prepare your final policy brief as part of this problem statement.
Thank you, Devika. Thank you, Mohammed, for that really insightful information sharing session. So I'll be covering the second part of this policy challenge statement as part of ISPIC. Before that, I'll just quickly introduce myself. I am Radhika. I work as the policy specialist at GFI India. I lead the government partnerships and stakeholder engagement for public policy at the Good Food Institute India. So today I will just take you through the work that we do, our theory of change. Then we'll go through how we can do research for public policy analysis, and how we can put in that research into a letter of representation or a policy brief that we will share with the government. And then we can also pause towards the end for any question and answers. You can also add your questions on the chat, but I'll try to keep this as brief as possible because I know we've had you now for more than 45 minutes. So the Good Food Institute India is a network of non-profit organizations. We work in several key regions. We are an organization that works with scientists, entrepreneurs, investors, government members, policymakers to diversify the protein sources for a more secure, sustainable, and just food system. So our science and technology team consists of PhD scientists that work to advance the open source, the foundational science that's required to develop alternative protein. We have a corporate engagement team which builds relationships with the world's largest food manufacturers, meat companies, restaurants, and retailers to help them capitalize on opportunities in alternative protein. The innovation team provides support to industry entrepreneurs and startups, as well as investors and financial institutions. The policy team, which I am a part of, advocates for fair regulations of plant-based fermentation and cultivated protein, and we work with government bodies and policymakers to increase public investments and for them to recognize the potential of alternative protein in India. Why alternative protein? Well, because there is a lot of inefficiency of industrial animal agriculture. It contributes a lot to food insecurity because the livestock or growing food in that manner competes for limited land and agricultural inputs, and we can bypass that whole process. We also think that it would be more efficient than manure. It is also really unsafe to produce food in a manner that relies on animals. It also increases the antimicrobial resistance in human beings over a long-term process. So, and even though this information is quite out there in the public forum, consumers still consume animal protein because the demand just keeps rising. Even more in countries in Asia, the demand rises and rise in income. So how do we tackle this problem, especially if we look at 2025 or 2030, when there are going to be lesser resources and more people? So our theory of change is that to make the meat, egg, dairy, or seafood products that people love in a more sustainable or efficient manner, what we call smart protein, or globally it's known as alternative protein, are basically fermentation derived or cultivated protein. It's an alternative to conventional meat, eggs, dairy, or seafood. We believe that with government support in an accelerated manner, especially through global consensus, this would make alternative proteins cheaper, more delicious, and more, in general, more affordable for for a consumer. Now coming to the problem statement, since Mohammed covered the first part of the problem statement and going through the environment analysis, the second part, which is mapping key policy stakeholders and drafting a policy brief, is what I'm going to touch upon. So in general, I just wanted to take you through what the public policy making process looks like. So you begin with identification of an issue. So if, for instance, in this particular example of alternative protein, the issue is that if we continue to rely on this process of feeding, like growing food to feed animals and eating that animal as a source of nutrition, it could have effects on land, water, other resources. It can have environmental benefits in general, but also impact public health. And it's not like a very foolproof public nutrition strategy. Then, when we look at an issue, then we look at how can we formulate a policy that addresses the challenges in the issue, right? So that's the policy formulation bit. And then during that process of policy formulation, when the government is, or when stakeholders are writing to the government that these are elements that we can look at when we are identifying an issue, there's some key parameters that we'll look into, which I'll cover later. And then the policy gets adopted by the government with approval of, let's say, large stakeholder groups such as consumers or interest groups. Then the policy is implemented, which when it comes into force, let's say a geography where it will be India. If it's an international rule-making body, then it would be an optional implementation with the expectations that countries implement the policy recommendation that a body like the United Nations has put forth. And then in a process of policy making, an ideal world, there's also an element of policy evaluation on a regular basis where you can evaluate. Sorry, I think there's some internet issues. Devika, are you able to see me, hear me? Should I switch off my camera?
Yeah, so I just paused your camera for a bit. We can hear you, but
okay.
It's slightly in between. It's improved since, so you can continue. Sorry.
Okay, sure. No worries. Thank you. So like I was saying, an ideal policy process will also keep an element of evaluation. So you can look at how good a policy has fared. So if it's a rule, if it's a nudge, if it's a regulation, if there's a possibility to gain consensus from, let's say, industry members or consumer interest groups on how the policy has fared, has it affected them positively, negatively, are there changes that can be made? And so this is almost a cycle in certain cases, but this is what the whole process looks like. So there is some bodies that we can look at, or avenues that we can look at when we are undertaking policy research. And this is not comprehensive. This is especially for you while you are preparing the policy brief. So if it's on how we can position alternative protein. And in this example, it is for the Indian government. We look at certain bodies to get information on how we can structure our recommendations. So obviously, one is the rule-making bodies, the executive or the legislature. So we look at the Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha. We can look at the standing committee reports. It can be on action taken reports. It can be bills that have been referred to the committee. It has a lot of data in general, so it gives you an idea of what discussions are floating around in the parliament. It can give an idea of which members of parliament are more positive about climate change or about agricultural, let's say, revolutions, things like that. And most of this can be found online. Another avenue for finding what the current hot topic is in the parliament is through Lok Sabha question answers. So there have been one or two questions that have been posed already on alternative protein and whether the government is willing to support it and what type of support is it willing to extend. So that's a good way of posing a question to a parliamentarian, because then we can understand what they are thinking about an emerging area of technology, for instance. Then there's also ministry reports, policy documents, and other publications where you can understand if there is an approach to a particular sector or a program, how it's been documented, how it's been analyzed, what is the philosophy behind decisions that's taken by the ministry. And usually this kind of this research from ministry reports directly can form the bedrock of policy research. The next is sort of looking at constitutional or statutory commissions. The next one is reports and working papers of government think tanks. Sorry, the earlier one would not really be very useful for this particular example, so I'm skipping that. So the fourth one is reports or working papers of government think tanks and academic institutions. So looking at it like NITI Aayog, for instance, they have a lot of reports on, let's say, how we can work on energy transition. They have specific key public policy professionals that have worked on water policy or energy policy. So seeing if there's anything that they've discussed on agricultural reforms that could be useful for alternative protein in terms of localizing the supply chain or supporting like farmer welfare in producing crops that are not just wheat or paddy, but let's say millet, which can be then utilized in a millet plant-based dairy product or a plant-based meat product. So really looking at their reports and statistics, looking at the Indian Council for Research and International Economic Relations. That's another organization, and I can share these links with you afterwards. Another one is the data and statistics collected by the Government of India. So you might know about NSSO, which is the National Sample Survey Organization, looking at bodies like the Labor Bureau. If you are saying, for instance, that alternative protein production in a region in Madhya Pradesh can positively impact talent generation or economic generation, how would you find that information? You'll have to go into like the Labor Bureau, understand what kind of skill set is shared across, let's say, farmers or people that are operators or food technologists in that particular region. So then you'll be able to make your recommendations more impactful, because those would be one of the interest groups or stakeholder groups that you would be targeting. Then you can also look at international rule or policy making bodies, because those will usually have a guideline or a guiding policy on how a particular country needs to formulate their policies or regulations. So if it is the United Nations or the UNFCCC, they have the nationally determined contributions that usually gives a guideline on how India also makes climate contributions towards energy transition. So if the focus is on coal, then what amount by what time are they looking to reduce coal? Is there any mention on food systems transformation? And how are they working to work on that, like in terms of policy changes or bilateral connections, if there's been any partnerships, programs, all of that. So that's another avenue that you can look at. So this is one way that you can look at undertaking the policy research. The next one is identifying stakeholders, which is very important, and it's going to be a criteria for evaluating your public policy brief. So stakeholders will have diverse interests and communication styles. So working with them is not always easy. This is a power interest grid that's there on the left side, which can help you recognize each stakeholder's level of influence and the benefits they could gain from your action. So that's the kind of approach you'll need to make when you're putting down your recommendations or your policy brief. So it will help you sort of strengthen your communication strategy and allow you to work more efficiently with each person. So if you look at the right side quadrant of manage closely, usually these people have the highest power and the interest. They need to be managed or engaged with the most closest. They're probably going to be involved in important decisions, and definitely you'll be engaging with them on a regular basis. So in the example of a policy brief, it could be the particular ministry that you'll be sharing the policy brief to. Which ministry will it be based on the data that you're presenting? There's so many ministries, so during your research, you'll also identify which of those ministries you're going to prioritize. Then the left side quadrant of the top half is the keep satisfied, which they have power, but they might have relatively low interest. The optimal approach here is to attract as little of their attention as possible, but you keep them satisfied. So some of the policymakers be like this. Let's say if GFI, even now, if we approach the office of the Prime Minister right now, they are very powerful, but their interest might be quite low right now because they have other competing priorities. So it would be better to approach a different ministry. The lower quadrant says monitor. So these are highly interested but relatively powerless groups. So you can generally keep them happy by keeping them informed. So this could be a consumer group. Let's say there's a consumer group of vegans that have a network across India. They do a lot of, let's say, meetups, and they do a lot of community awareness on social media. But in terms of power, they might not have a lot of power in influencing public policy at the government level. But you'd still want to keep them in the loop or talk about them when you're putting down their brief as an action group whose interests that you want to consider through a policy change. Then the right side quadrant on the bottom half is the keep informed. It could be relative bystanders with limited interest of power. Usually just monitoring these stakeholders is sufficient. So again, it could be some of the interest groups that might be interested in alternative protein, and they have some amount of power because they do engage in negotiations with the government, for instance. So it would be nice to keep them in the loop or talk about them or talk about activities that they've done to sort of remind the government that there is interest and you are not the sole body that's making a recommendation. So the next half of what I want to cover in identifying stakeholders is now you've identified through a power or interest matrix. Now, how are we going to balance the objectives? So let's say you are writing a policy brief to the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship. What is the ask that you're going to go with? Is it going to be employment generation, or are you going to talk about reducing carbon footprint? So keeping in mind, what is their institutional mandate, and how are you going to align your ask to an objective that they are working on, and removing things that are not important. So in this, I'm not going to give you the answer of which objective is more relevant, and I hope through the example you understand, and through the stakeholder analysis, so which angle that you're going to take when you're putting down a policy brief. The next one is presenting your data. So you need to integrate a techno-economic analysis, an environmental analysis, a socio-technical, and a political perspective when you're putting down a brief. But there could be varying degrees of which one you'll depend on when you're putting together a brief. When you talk about effectiveness, are the suggested recommendations, are they worded to be an effective solution? Do you think the government will be able to understand what the what a particular solution looks like? Do you think it will meet the targets that they are interested in? Second is cost. Does the solution address the cost of adoption of the solution? So before, like when solar technology was being proposed to the government, there was a question on how expensive would it be? So there were some cost parameters that interest groups had to talk about, like how can you reduce the cost of adopting this technology in a large scale manner? So how are you going to do that? A hint could be that localizing the supply chain usually helps a lot with reducing the cost. So that could be something that you can look into. The third one is technical. Is it technical? Is there sufficient technological know-how in adoption of the solution? Is the government understanding the technical requirements of, like, say, infrastructure setup or the academic engagement? Is there readiness in the country to adopt a solution that you're proposing? Is it already undergoing a huge adoption in, let's say, the scientific community? Then you can talk about that. The last one is political, which is looking a little bit at the risk analysis as well. So is the solution politically acceptable? It might make no sense to the government. We should make a plant-based meat product that's accessible to the entire population next year, because it won't meet the effectiveness, cost analysis, or the technical analysis. So when do you think the government can adopt something like this into a mainstream food strategy? Is it aligning to their political mandates? There could be some bodies that are more interested in, like I was saying earlier, in employment generation. There could be some working on, let's say, just transition in energy. There could be some groups that are, more religiously aligned. So I think just having an understanding on how to structure this is very important. The right side, I've just given examples. So there's a lot of GFI resources that you could look into at the Good Food Institute's India website or the global website, the US team's website. This is the first one, is the economic opportunity. So like you could use this when you speak to, or when you align a policy brief to stakeholders who are more interested in, let's say, economic development, manufacturing, export. But the second one, which is on environment, might not be similarly relevant for a body that's looking at economic development. That might be secondary to them, but it might be primary to another body that's mostly working on environment and climate change. So the evaluation criteria that we will use to evaluate your policy brief is looking at which stakeholders you have chosen, why you have chosen them, the reasoning, your research into understanding that stakeholder. Does it meet the parameters that I mentioned before of being active, cost, efficient? Is it technical? Is it taking into account the political scenario? And then we'll also look at the sort of skeleton brief that you put together on how you put together your ask, or what your major asks are, or what your recommendations are. How are you taking the information from the environment analysis or the LCO analysis that Mohammed shared, and how are you translating that into this recommendation? How much portion of it are you, like, what's the weightage that you're going to use, and what are the other tools that you're going to use? So these are some of the elements of the evaluation criteria that we will look into for the first round. So yeah, that's basically it. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them now.
Thanks so much, Radhika. I think we have one question in the Q&A box. I'm not exactly sure if I fully understand it. But I think it's surrounding whether laws are aligned with public interest.
Got it.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see the question as well.
I can. I'm just going through it. Yeah, I think, I understand the question. I think, we work as an organization to ensure that, companies that are using alternative protein talk about their products in a honest and transparent manner. So it's not being represented as a conventional meat product. So I think that is something that we don't have to worry about. But definitely, when I talked about the political scenario, I think that's where you can take into interest the public interest of implementing something like an alternative protein for the entire country. So how will you position that? If the focus right now is not on consumer adoption, maybe it can be on supporting the production and manufacturing of alternative protein. And then at a point, let's say 5 years, when the production and manufacturing have increased so much that it's penetrated the consumer adoption, then we can tackle the challenge of consumer adoption. I hope that answers your question to some level.
Yeah, if you have a follow-up to that, please do reach out to us on either the Q&A box or the chat box. I don't see any other questions, but if we do have them, now is your time to ask. You can also reach out to us as a follow-up, the same with Mohammed as well. If you have a question for Radhika, you can reach out to us at ispic@gfi.org. We'll wait another few minutes to see if any other questions come in, after which we will be moving on to our networking session that's being hosted on our Meetaway platform, on which all of you have already been registered. So all you have to do is go into the joining link, which I'm now going to put into the chat as well. So you can move away from this Zoom webinar, go into the Meetaway platform. You will be prompted to just enter your profile. So you're already registered, so you just have to sign in. After which we have set up 6 rounds of 6 minutes each for you to do one-on-one networking, but you can choose to attend 1 round, 2 rounds, all the rounds as much as your time permits. This is your opportunity to really meet other people who are really inclined on working on this problem statement and start building your teams. As you might have seen from all the registration guides that we sent across, you have until 16 July to lock in your team. So this is a great opportunity for you to meet like-minded others who want to work on the same problem statement. With that, I am just going to put the Meetaway link into the chat. So if you have no more questions for our speakers, you can move away from this platform and move on to Meetaway, where you can start networking with your fellow cohort. Thank you, Radhika. Thank you, Mohammed, for your time. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you, David.
Thank you, everyone.
I'm going to be staying on this platform as well if anyone has any questions, but I urge you all to head over to Meetaway so you can start networking. I've resent the link onto the chat for anyone else who's still on this platform. Please do head over to Meetaway. Please also ensure that you're logged into the Meetaway platform using your registered mail IDs, because that's the one we have used to register you. So the mail ID that you have registered yourself for ISPIC, please use the same when you're registering on Meetaway. Do not log in using another email ID. You will not be able to see this particular session. I'm closing this webinar now. If you have any queries, please feel free to reach out to us over Slack. Thank you.